Are things on earth as bad as they can get, or is there worse to come? The answer next on the Prophetic Connection. This place, the Mount of Olives, very near fulfilling the prophecy, waiting for the day when the Messiah will come. According to the book of Revelation, the last book in the Holy Bible, the revelation of Jesus Christ, what Jesus revealed to John the Apostle on the island of Patmos when he gave him that panorama of the distant future. According to that book, there will be terrible times that will precede the second coming of Jesus Christ. We wish it were otherwise, but the Bible doesn't lie, and God's truth has been revealed to us through none other than the risen Jesus of Nazareth. But even earlier than the writing of the book of Revelation, Jesus told his disciples about the end times, and he gave them signs of the times. And he said in Matthew 24 in verse 9 and 10, "Then they will deliver you up to tribulation and kill you, and you will be hated by all nations for my name's sake. And then many will be offended, will betray one another, and will hate one another." And as Jesus is giving these clear signs of the times, he goes on to say this in Matthew 24 in verse 21 and verse 22, "For then there will be great tribulation, such as has not been since the beginning of the world until this time. No, nor ever shall be. And unless those days were shortened, no flesh would be saved. But for the elect's sake, those days will be shortened." So Jesus told us of the terrible times that were to come. And I believe we're in those end times, and that things are going to, I wish I could say otherwise. I mean, the wars of the 20th century and the European Holocaust, the killing of 6 million Jewish people, those things were terrible in themselves. But Jesus said this time of trouble, tribulation, is going to be unprecedented. There'll be nothing that has happened like this before it, and there'll be nothing that happens after it. It's going to be the worst of times on planet Earth. But there will be good news at the very end of days, beyond the trouble that is to come.
Today, more than ever, our world seems to be becoming a more hopeless and lost place. But what does the future hold according to the Word of God? And what can we expect as believers in what may be the end of days?
I believe that according to the Bible, the future is bleaker than the past, but also it's more brilliant and more magnificent. So as the world gets increasingly more corrupt and more disabled and more brutal and violent, the church begins to emerge more and more as the bride of Christ. And so you have this duality that's taking place, that the world gets darker, the world gets more violent, the world produces more persecution and injustice, and at the same time, the church becomes perfected and begins to rise up as the bride of Christ and as the kingdom that the King of Kings is coming back to rule.
As I look into the future, I see two things happening. I see greater trouble in the earth, but I also see greater revelation of God and harvest, but there's going to be more of a division between light and darkness. There's going to be gross darkness on the earth, but also brilliant light of revelation for those who will have their eyes open, who will have the eyes of faith to see that. And I think the greatest revival in world history will happen in the future.
Does this mean Christians will face greater or less persecution in the years ahead?
I'm sorry to say that I believe that Christians must endure more difficult times ahead. So many of us long for the return of the Lord. We wish we were deeper in the end times, closer to the return of the Lord. But I think those will be the most difficult times that we have to face. And He will return to bring an end to the challenges, the difficulty, and the suffering that believers will be required to go through. And so Actually, we should thank God that we're now in the end times and we have the freedom and the ability to do the work, because the night comes when no man will be able to work.
Does the Bible give us any clues about the times of suffering to come?
We were looking for a pattern of suffering for the saints. We could look back at the people of Israel in Egypt and remember that although they were preserved through all of the plagues, first of all, they did experience the first 3 plagues even in the city of Goshen themselves, and then God preserved them through all of the plagues. He didn't simply take them out of Egypt prior to the plagues existing. And if we like to see Revelation and the book of Exodus with Passover in some type of correspondence together, then you can see that pattern of enduring as saints through a difficult time, coming out as the people of God purified, seems to be the same pattern.
This pattern of suffering is also found in the Old Testament book of Daniel, which was written 2,500 years ago. Daniel was told that Israel would experience unprecedented trouble at the end of days.
In the book of Daniel, we read about Michael, the archangel, and Michael goes to war against principalities and powers. We read about the prince of Persia. In fact, that prince was pretty powerful, could even delay the fulfillment of somebody's prayers. But Michael is greater, and Michael wins the war. He identifies with the people of God, first of all to Israel, and then all those who are grafted in among the olive tree, the people of Israel, as the people of God. We can count on Michael being this great sent one by God himself to win the greatest battle that will happen in world history.
Well, the archangel Michael, whose name in Hebrew means "who is like God," is really the angel that protects Israel. I mean, if we understand that the woman that gives birth to the child is really a prophetic symbol of Israel, Michael is doing battle to protect her. So Michael is protecting Israel. Michael is the angel that is assigned to watch over God's purposes for the nation and the land and the people of Israel specifically.
While it is clear from Daniel's description about the end of days, the Bible promises that ultimately speaking, good will triumph over evil, and Christ's glorious kingdom, with its capital in the New Jerusalem, will be established on earth. Don't go away. After this short break, Dr. John Tweedy returns with his teaching.
As we saw in the introduction to this episode, Jesus prophesied of terrible times ahead. Now we know he gave the signs of the times of false prophets arising, of wars and rumors of wars, of famines, pestilences, earthquakes, and all of these things increasing in frequency and intensity. But in addition to those signs, he said there will be a time of great tribulation, unprecedented trouble, such as the world has never seen to that time, no, nor ever shall be after it is over. And then we have the whole book of the Revelation of Jesus Christ, the last book of the New Testament and of the whole Bible, where John the Apostle is a prisoner on the island of Patmos, there because he was preaching the good news of Christ. He's obviously a very old man, but the risen Christ appears to him and gives him a panoramic view of the future. And much of what John wrote in Revelation hasn't happened as I stand here today with the hills of Galilee as my backdrop. In fact, the book of Revelation says that there is a coming war in heaven and turmoil on earth. And I want to look at that more closely as it is described in Revelation chapter 12. And really, this is a drama, and there are 4 key players in the drama, and I'll have to explain them one by one. And of course, once again, we're left to interpretation because John, using a first century mindset, describes what he sees in words of his own day. And of course, we're living 2,000 years later. But let's take it a step at a time. We'll look at each of these 4 players in the drama, but one at a time. So John describes what he sees, and this is what he wrote down. Now a great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and on her head a garland of 12 stars. And you know, there are prophecy watchers looking at the constellations and claiming that this constellation, this alignment of the stars, is what John described in Revelation chapter 12. Well, we'll leave that to their opinion and to that possibility and other interpretations. But what I'm thinking about is something that Joseph dreamed. Joseph, one of the 12 sons of Jacob, who was a dreamer of dreams. And of course, his brothers were jealous of him and arranged for him to be kidnapped and taken to Egypt. And then, of course, his coat of many colors dripped in blood that his father had given him because he was a favorite, and then said that he had been torn apart by wild animals and that whole thing. But part of it was because Joseph was gifted of God and could dream dreams. And here's one of the dreams, and in fact, this infuriated his brothers, and they were envious of him. So it says that in verse 9 of Genesis 37, then he, Joseph, dreamed still another dream, and told it to his brothers and said, look, I have dreamed another dream. You know, if he had been wise, he might have kept his dreams to himself, given what happened to him afterwards. And this time the sun, the moon, and the 11 stars bowed down to me. He, presumably being the 12th star. So he told it to his father and his brothers, and his father rebuked him and said to him, what is this dream that you have dreamed? Shall your mother and I and your brothers indeed come to bow down to the earth before you? So it infuriated his whole family, but it was in fact the truth. It was a prophetic dream of what was to come. And God was simply showing Joseph, but his brothers and his parents weren't about to accept it. And it says in verse 11 of Genesis 37, and his brothers envied him, but his father kept the matter in mind. So I use that to support my argument, my interpretation certainly, that the woman that appears in heaven with the sun, the moon under her feet, and on her head a garland of 12 stars, I believe that that is a symbol. These are symbols of the nation of Israel, because Joseph represents Israel. And then it says, then being with child, she cried out in labor and in pain to give birth. And another sign appeared in heaven, and behold, a great fiery red dragon having 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 diadems on his head. His tail drew 1/3 of the stars of heaven and threw them to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman who was ready to give birth to devour her child as soon as it was born. So, and in verse 5, more specifically, she bore a male child who was to rule all nations with a rod of iron, and her child was caught up to God and his throne. So now we have the second player in the drama, and that's the child that the woman, I believe Israel, gives birth to. Now, once again, there are many interpretations. Some would suggest that the child represents the 144,000 that are specially sealed and are caught up to God in heaven. And that's a possible interpretation. But I have a different interpretation. It's the one that I'm most comfortable with is the male child who was to rule all nations with a rod of iron. I believe that child was Jesus of Nazareth. That's my opinion and my interpretation. And of course, other people are entitled to their interpretations, and they may have different opinions. And the other thing I'm conscious of is that when Jesus was born in Bethlehem, remember that Herod, King Herod, dispatched his soldiers to Bethlehem, and they killed all male children 2 years old and under. And so, in other words, Satan tried to snatch away the child at birth. Now, he succeeded later in the crucifixion of Jesus, but of course, could not have anticipated the resurrection that was to come. So that's the second player in the drama. I believe that was Jesus. And then we read in verse 6, the woman fled into the wilderness. So we have, let's see, we have Israel as the woman. We have the second player in the drama, Satan, who tried to snatch away the child. And then we have the child, I believe, was Jesus. And so we read, then the woman fled into the wilderness, where she has a place prepared by God that they should feed her there 1,260 days, or 3.5 years. And then we read in verse 7, and war broke out in heaven, and Michael and his angels fought with the dragon and his angels fought, but they did not prevail, nor was their place found for them in heaven any longer. So the fourth player in the drama is Michael, the archangel, the warrior angel, who goes forth to fight as the defender of Israel. And then we read on. Verse 9, so the great dragon was cast out, that serpent of old, called the devil and Satan, who deceives the whole world. He was cast into the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. Let me now take a closer look at the fourth player in this unfolding drama. And I want to look at Michael, the archangel, because while he's in the 12th chapter of Revelation, he's in other books of the Bible as well. In fact, we can go back 2,500 years ago to where Michael is active, where Israel is concerned, in the life of Daniel, yet another prophet. And Daniel was exiled in Babylon. And of course, in Daniel chapter 10 and verse 1, we read these words. In the 3rd year of Cyrus, king of Persia, a message was revealed to Daniel, whose name was called Belteshazzar. The message was true, but the appointed time was long, meaning off in the future. And he understood the message and had understanding of the vision. And in those days I, Daniel, was mourning 3 full weeks. I ate no pleasant food, no meat or wine came into my mouth, nor did I anoint myself at all, till 3 whole weeks were fulfilled. So Daniel was upset by the contents of the vision. Now, on the 24th day of the 1st month, as I was by the side of the great river that is the Tigris, a figure appears, a mysterious figure appears to him, and it's someone that God has sent to give Daniel the full interpretation of the vision he saw. And in verse 7, and I, Daniel, alone saw the vision, for the men who were with me did not see the vision, but a great terror fell upon them, so that they fled to hide themselves, because Daniel saw this mysterious messenger from heaven, and they did not, but they were in fear and trembling. And then we read in verse 8, therefore I was left alone when I saw this great vision, and no strength remained in me, for my vigor was turned to frailty in me, and I retained no strength. So he had an incredible encounter with this messenger from heaven. And in fact it says, yet I heard the sound of his words, and while I heard the sound of his words, I was in a deep sleep, on my face, with my face to the ground. Suddenly a hand touched me, which made me tremble on my knees and on the palms of my hands. And he said to me, O Daniel, man greatly beloved, understand the words that I speak to you, and stand upright, for I have now been sent to you. And while he was speaking this word to me, I stood trembling. He's painting a very vivid picture for us. Then he said to me, do not fear, Daniel, from the first day that you set your heart to understand and to humble yourself before God. Your words were heard, and I have come because of your words. Now this, and this is where Michael enters the story. But the prince of the kingdom of Persia withstood me 21 days. And behold, Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help me, for I had been left alone there with the kings of Persia. In other words, this messenger was dispatched from God 21 days earlier, but a stronger demonic messenger, servant of Satan, withstood this messenger of God. And he couldn't overcome him for 21 days until Michael the archangel came to his aid and stood by his side. And then he could break through and reach Daniel and bring the message to him. That's what we're being told in the text, that in the spiritual realm, there are incredible battles taking place between warring angels. In verse 14, now I have come to make you understand what will happen to your people in the latter days, for the vision refers to many days yet to come. And the latter days, really, we talk about that, we're talking about the signs of the times Jesus gave, we're talking about the entire book of Revelation. So Daniel saw things that made him tremble, but they referred to the times in the distant future, and probably even could be the times we're living in, but certainly other events that are beyond these times. And so this fourth player in the drama of Revelation 12 is the same Michael the archangel who stands up, it seems, for the people of Israel. And we could see Michael's role in the end of days when all the nations come against Israel and Jerusalem. Michael, again, will go forth to fight. And that's what John saw and records in Revelation chapter 12. Now, it's interesting to see in Revelation 12 that Verse 7, and war broke out in heaven. And Michael and his angels fought with the dragon, meaning Satan. And the dragon and his angels fought, but they did not prevail, nor was a place found for them in heaven any longer. You see, up to this point, Satan has access to the throne room of God. But a day will come and in fact, the Bible tells us here in verse 11 that he accuses the brethren before God day and night. And in fact, it's in verse 10 and 11, but I'll read it for you. Then I heard a loud voice saying in heaven, now salvation and strength in the kingdom of our God and the power of his Christ have come. For the accuser of our brethren, who accused them before our God day and night, has been cast down. That's Satan. Revelation 12, verse 10. And it says in verse 11, and they overcame him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of the testimony, and they did not love their lives to the death. Then this, therefore rejoice, O heavens, and you who dwell in them. Woe to the inhabitants of the earth and the sea, for the devil has come down to you, having great wrath, because he knows he has a short time. When we speak about Israel, the question is, where does Israel fit in this end time scenario when there's war in heaven and turmoil on earth? I'll share Israel's place right after this short break. When we ask the question, where does Israel fit in this end-time drama that's outlined for us in Revelation chapter 12, we find clues in the text itself. For example, we're told, first of all, in Revelation 12, verse 7, that there was a war in heaven, and Michael and his angels fought with the dragon, Satan, and the dragon and his angels fought, but they did not prevail, nor was a place found for them in heaven any longer. And then after this, we read that in verse 13, now when the dragon saw that he had been cast to the earth, he persecuted the woman who gave birth to the male child. And the woman, of course, I believe, is Israel. But the woman was given 2 wings of a great eagle. Now, John's writing this in the 1st century. What did he see? Did he see airplanes? Was it an airlift and that's the only way he could describe it, the wings of a great eagle? Probably many great eagles if that's the case. But then we read that she might fly into the wilderness to her place, where she is nourished for a time and times and half a time. And we've seen before that that's 3.5 years. From the presence of the serpent, another name for Satan. So the serpent spewed out water of his mouth like a flood after the woman, that he might cause her to be carried away by the flood. Now, I'm standing this morning in the Jordan Valley. It's 30 degrees and above. It's very hot. But to my right, out of camera view, is the city of Jericho. And up through the wilderness of Judea, beyond Jericho, is the city of Jerusalem. And to the east, that way, across the Jordan River, the kingdom of Jordan, and then up in the hills of Jordan, the capital city of Amman. The traffic's lined up behind me here because this is a bridge crossing across the River Jordan. You can see the sign over my right shoulder, the King Hussein Bridge, also known as the Allenby Bridge, because in 1917, the British general, Allenby, with his British and Allied troops, came through the length of this land. In 1917, it was called Palestine. Today it's Israel again. But in 1917, the Ottoman Turks were here. They had been here for 400 years. And so the British Army and the Allied armies coming through swept them out of this land. And that opened up the possibility that the Jews could return, and this could be, again, the land of Israel. Now, we're told in the scripture that the earth opens up, somewhere here presumably, and swallows up the army that follows Israel, because Israel will flee into the wilderness, the text says, and presumably across into Jordan to a place of safety, and they'll have to cross at least this bridge and perhaps other crossing places. But they will be fleeing for their lives. But the earth will open up and swallow the horde that follows them. And then this, the last verse. And the dragon was enraged with the woman, Israel, and he went to make war with the rest of her offspring who keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus Christ. The days of tribulation Jesus talked about, but he also said they will be shortened because God will intervene on behalf of those who have the testimony of Jesus Christ, those who belong to God. Well, when will Christ come? That's the subject of the next episode of this current series.
Thanks for watching The Prophetic Connection, and join us next time for The King is Coming.